12 million people pay the same monthly bill, and almost none of them know what it's actually funding. Look, I didn't either. I had Starlink filed under Internet for Farms, a dish for people the cable company forgot about. Then I read the numbers. Starlink brought in $11.4 billion of revenue in 2025, up 48% from $7.7 billion in 2024. That's 61% of everything SpaceX makes. The side project is now the company. And here's what bugged me. Nobody's ever traced where a subscriber's money actually goes once it leaves their bank account. Do the division. $11.4 billion, 12 million customers, roughly $950 per customer per year. Call it $80 a month times 12 million people every month forever. Where does that river of money end up? Not where you think. Follow it with me. Because that dish is suddenly everywhere, and $80 a month is just the average. A US residential customer is worth about $2,000 a year, and residential is the cheap seats of this business. The dish is bolted to cargo ships and yachts, where maritime service runs about $34,000 a year. It's on planes feeding seatback Wi-Fi. Aviation customers pay around $300,000. In June 2026, Starlink announced it was connecting more than 12 million active customers across more than 160 countries and territories. And it's in war zones. February 2022, Russia invades Ukraine, a cyber attack takes down the country's internet, and Ukraine's digital minister, Mikhailo Fedorov, tweets directly at Elon Musk asking for help. Within days, 20,000 terminals arrive. Hold on to that one. It comes back and it gets darker. Then in May 2026, SpaceX filed its S-1, the paperwork a private company files when it wants an IPO, an initial public offering, the day its shares go on sale to the public, and its private math becomes everyone's math. The filing targeted a valuation of approximately $1.75 trillion and aimed to raise up to $75 billion, which would make it the largest IPO in history. For scale, Saudi Aramco's 2019 listing raised $29 billion, and that was the previous record holder. This ask is more than double it. And buried under all of that, one detail that makes no normal business sense. For years, SpaceX sold that dish for less than it cost to build, millions of times, on purpose. Why would any sane company do that? That question unlocks the entire machine. To find the answer, you have to go back to the night this whole thing was announced, because the room that heard it got the pitch wrong, and most of us have been getting it wrong ever since. On January 16th, 2015, at a private event at the Seattle Center, a civic auditorium better known for the 1962 World's Fair than for the future of the internet, Elon Musk made the first public announcement of plans to deploy the Starlink satellite constellation, slides with orbital diagrams, a room full of investors and press. He tells them he's filed documents with international regulators to place about 4,000 satellites overhead, and then he says the line that defines the whole project. We're really talking about something which is, in the long term, like rebuilding the internet in space. The room hears bold new internet company. Now check the launch manifest. At this moment, SpaceX has never launched a single Starlink satellite. It has never successfully landed a reusable rocket. The constellation exists entirely as paperwork and ambition. The next year, regulatory filings go to the FCC, the federal agency that controls America's airwaves and the subsidy money that flows through them, for an initial deployment of 4,425 satellites. And that number never stops growing. The proposal swells to nearly 12,000, with expansion plans reaching toward 42,000. Keep that ceiling in mind. Regulators and rivals now have to respond to a fleet made of paper. Here's the part that almost never gets told. The idea wasn't even his alone. Through 2014, Musk had been sketching a constellation of 700 relay satellites with a partner, Greg Weiler, founder of WorldView. By mid-2014, their paths split. Weiler took the same basic idea and went off to build OneWeb. What Weiler didn't have was a rocket company. Hold that thought, it's the whole game. So why announce it? Why file for thousands of satellites you can't launch yet? Because of the other thing Musk had been saying for years: Mars. Getting humans to another planet costs more money than any government has ever been willing to appropriate. Congress won't vote for it. And Musk has staked the core thesis of his life on the idea that private enterprise can do what governments cannot. So he needed a revenue engine big enough to fund a space program all by itself. Launch is a services business. You fly someone's satellite, you get paid once. Internet is a subscription. Internet bills forever. Run the numbers on his actual ambition and the pitch inverts. He was pitching a way to pay for Mars, and the whole room heard broadband. Nobody in that auditorium wrote a check for a Mars program that night. They didn't have to. The customers would. Of course, a pitch isn't a machine, and in 2015 the machine didn't exist. Here's how they built it, brick by brick. The first in-orbit test came on February 22nd, 2018, when two small demo satellites nicknamed Tintin A and Tintin B rode to space with Spain's PAZ mission. Their job was to prove the basic links worked. They reached orbit, started testing, and then both stopped communicating. Two prototypes moving at 17,000 miles an hour, and the engineers on the ground could no longer talk to them. If that failure hadn't been solvable, the program might have stalled right there. Instead, the lessons got folded into the next design. 15 months later, the real bet. May 24th, 2019, 2:30 in the morning, UTC, Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral. A Falcon 9 lifts off, SpaceX's reusable rocket, the one whose first stage flies back down and lands on a ship, ready to fly again. This particular booster is on its third flight. 8 minutes after launch, it settles onto a drone ship in the Atlantic named Of Course I Still Love You. The payload, 60 satellites, flat packed in a dense vertical stack. A used rocket launching the seeds of an $11 billion business. That one image is Starlink's entire cost structure. Here's why. The old way to do satellite internet was one giant geostationary satellite parked 35,786 kilometers out, so high it hangs motionless over one patch of the planet, and so far away that talking through it felt like calling someone a tenth of the way to the moon. Starlink flipped the model. Thousands of small satellites in low Earth orbit, just 550 kilometers up, about New York to Pittsburgh, close enough that your data makes the round trip in 20 to 60 milliseconds. That's a New York to London fibre call, delivered from the sky. But satellites that close don't sit still. Each one crosses your sky in 4 to 6 minutes, so you need a swarm. More than 7,600 today. And a swarm means launching replacements constantly, forever. There's the first dollar fact. This business only pencils out if rockets cost you almost nothing. The dish is the second. It's a flat pizza box antenna with no moving parts, electronically steering its beam to track satellites doing 17,000 miles an hour. And no moving parts means no motors, no gears, nothing to stop you stamping it out on an assembly line for cheap. Hold both of those. And this is the moat, vertical integration, owning every step yourself, the rocket, the satellite, the dish, the launch pad, so nobody in the chain charges you a markup. End-to-end control took a typical satellite launch cost from $400 million down to $62 million. Per unit, a Starlink satellite costs roughly $300,000 to $500,000 to build and about $250,000 to launch. Call it $600,000 deployed. And SpaceX deploys around 1,200 satellites a year. Anyone else building a constellation has to rent a rocket at market rates, often from SpaceX itself. You might be thinking, Amazon has nearly infinite money. Why can't they just do this? They're trying. Project Kuiper had 241 satellites in orbit against Starlink's 7,600 plus. By mid-2025, roughly 60% of every working satellite in low Earth orbit was a Starlink. And Amazon doesn't own rockets. It buys launches from United Launch Alliance and Blue Origin at market rates. Nobody copies this loop without their own rocket company. Greg Weiler could tell you. OneWeb never had one. In October 2020, the service opened to the public under a name that undersold the audacity, the better than nothing beta, $99 a month, $499 for the dish. That $499 is where things stop making normal sense. How does anyone get comfortable selling hardware at a huge loss, calmly, in public? For that you need Gwynne Shotwell, SpaceX's 11th employee, its president since 2008. In the early years, her job was selling launch contracts while SpaceX's rockets kept failing. A former NASA administrator put it plainly. She sold launches when SpaceX wasn't launching successfully and kept the customers happy while launches slipped out. She'd already sold rockets that couldn't fly. Selling internet that lost money on every customer was the same job, and she knew exactly how it ended. So, August 2021, a conference stage at the Space Symposium. Starlink looks like a runaway success. Subscribers pouring in, satellites going up 60 at a time, and Shotwell stands at the podium and volunteers a number nobody asked for. The original dish cost $3,000 to produce, and while the company got that down to $1,300, it was still selling the kit at a loss. Musk had said it himself that year. To be totally frank, we are losing money on that terminal right now. Every customer acquisition was a financial loss. That's a loss leader, selling below what it cost you to make, betting that owning the customer is worth more than the cash you just burned. And SpaceX didn't flinch. It kept shipping dishes at a loss, burning capital to lock up the market before Amazon's constellation could exist at scale. Today, that standard dish sells for as low as $149 in some US states. The company that once ate $2,500 per unit now uses the dish as a market share weapon. Every new customer made the company poorer. That was the plan. The dish was never the product. The loss was the price of admission. Buy the customer now, own the orbit forever. SpaceX says the bet paid off, that the math has closed, but the full books, nobody outside the company has ever seen them. Remember that. It's exactly what the skeptics keep pointing at. When the draft IPO prospectus surfaced, it disclosed that average revenue per subscriber fell 18% to $81 a month between 2023 and 2025, even as the subscriber base quadrupled, the global blend dragging the average down to that $80 we started with. A deliberate trade, give up pricing power, buy the planet. In May 2026, SpaceX reversed course and raised plan prices by up to $10 a month, which tells you it thinks the land grab phase is ending. But every analyst modelling this business is guessing at one figure, the one that would settle whether the loss leader bet truly paid off. We'll come back to which figure it is and why you can't have it. The one institution that did run a check sits in Washington. In December 2020, the FCC ran the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, a federal auction paying companies to bring broadband to homes nobody else would serve. Starlink won $885.5 million of it, committing to connect about 640,000 rural homes and businesses across 35 states, roughly $1,377 per household. Then came the test. Starlink had promised 100 megabit download speeds. By Ookla's numbers, the company behind the speed test half the internet uses, Starlink's median US download in the third quarter of 2023 was 64.54 megabits. Promised 100, delivered 64. On December 12, 2023, the FCC issued its final denial and clawed back the full $885.5 million with a line only a regulator could love. The applicant failed to meet its burden. SpaceX called itself deeply disappointed and perplexed, and in fairness, two commissioners dissented, arguing the agency was enforcing 2025 targets 3 years early. Either way, 642,925 rural addresses were left waiting. So the government asked for proof, didn't like the answer, and took its money back. Embarrassing, sure, but sit with what both of these stories actually say. One company decides who gets connected and nobody else gets a vote. In rural America, that cost people a broadband hookup. In Ukraine, it cost something else. Go back to those 20,000 terminals. Through 2022, they became the country's nervous system. Artillery correction, drone reconnaissance, communications between frontline units. The digital minister said it in so many words. Starlink is indeed the blood of our entire communication infrastructure now. Blood. Let me say that again. A government minister called a private company's product the blood of his nation's infrastructure. Then, September 2022, Ukrainian forces push a counter-offensive to retake territory, and in the middle of it, surveillance drones go dark mid-flight. Long-range artillery units that use Starlink to aim start floundering. Nobody jammed them. Nothing got shot down. Musk had ordered employees to cut coverage over areas of the fight, including around Kherson, the southern city Ukraine was in the middle of taking back. A senior Starlink engineer in California received the order and told colleagues, "We have to do this." One source told Reuters that Musk had taken the outcome of a war into his own hands. And separately, when Kyiv wanted Starlink active for a strike on Russia's fleet near Crimea, Musk refused. He wouldn't be complicit in a major act of war. He told his biographer why. He feared Russia would answer with nuclear weapons. A mini Pearl Harbor, in his phrase. And in fairness again, Walter Isaacson later corrected the record. The Crimea exclusion was pre-existing policy, and that night Musk simply reaffirmed it. Either version though, the same fact survives. One man's judgment was the entire appeals process. Ukraine had no other channel, no treaty covered this, no contract clause, no NATO hotline. 3 US senators wrote the Secretary of Defense demanding answers, and nothing came of it. Militaries everywhere absorbed the lesson fast, which is why the US Space Force handed SpaceX a $2.29 billion contract for a military internet in space, built on Starshield, the government's own variant of Starlink. Same satellites overhead, but the Pentagon pays a lot more than your $99 a month, because what it's really buying is a network nobody can switch off on it. That's what every subscriber actually bought, access, and access can be revoked. The blood of a nation's communications ran through one private company, and the owner could stop the flow with an order down the chain. He did. Still, the machine works. Starlink generated $4.4 billion of operating profit in 2025, making it SpaceX's core profit center. Operating profit means that, taken on its own, the internet business earns money on what it sells, about 38 cents on every dollar of revenue. 2 years earlier, this thing was a cash furnace. The crossing took roughly 24 months. Case closed, right? Follow the dollar one step further back. When SpaceX launches its own Starlink satellites, nobody writes an invoice. There's no launch revenue at all. The cost just gets filed as capital expenditure, meaning money spent building your own network, not money paid out to a supplier. SpaceX charges itself whatever it wants to charge. That's transfer pricing. When a company sells something to itself, the price is whatever it decides to write down. About 66% of SpaceX's launches are internal Starlink deployments, so the famous launch discount is real engineering and partly accounting. And the profit doesn't stay in Starlink. The S1 showed SpaceX's total 2025 revenue at $18.7 billion, with a $4.9 billion net loss. How does a company with a $4.4 billion profit engine lose $4.9 billion? Starship, SpaceX's next rocket, the one designed to carry people to Mars, the most expensive engineering project in the company's history. Starlink's cash is being fed straight into it. So that's the game. Wall Street noticed SpaceX's valuation hit approximately $800 billion in December 2025, up sharply from about $400 billion in July, doubled in 5 months. Shotwell projects up to 400 million eventual subscribers, 33 times today's base, roughly 1 in every 20 people on Earth, in the same register she once used to sell rockets that hadn't flown. The IPO asks the public to price an internet company whose stated purpose is funding interplanetary settlement. And here's the part buyers can't change. Musk keeps 42% of the equity and 79% of the voting power. You can own the stock. You cannot outvote the destination. Your monthly bill and the IPO buyer's shares feed the same line. Which answers the question we started with. You're not buying internet, you're buying rockets. 12 million people signed up for broadband and became the quietest space program funders in history. So here's the frame to keep. No internet provider has ever had a destination. This one does. Every subscriber is, functionally, an involuntary bondholder in a Mars program nobody voted on, and the voting structure guarantees it stays that way. Taxpayers are in the pipeline too. SpaceX holds $22 billion in cumulative federal awards, $15 billion from NASA, $7 billion from the Pentagon and Space Force. If you're American, you're in twice. Once through your bill, once through your taxes. And that $1.75 trillion ask, roughly the entire GDP of Australia in 2024, for one company. The costs aren't all on a balance sheet either. Each satellite lives about 5 years, then burns up on re-entry. At the full planned fleet, that 42,000 satellite ceiling from the paper filings, 5.5 times what's flying today, that's 8,400 satellites burning up every year. Forever. A typical 250 kilogram satellite comes back down as roughly 30 kilograms of aluminum oxide dust. At full deployment, about 360 tons of it injected into the upper atmosphere every year, a 646% increase over natural levels. It's already started. Satellite origin aluminum pollution rose 8-fold between 2016 and 2022, and those particles take up to 30 years to drift down to the ozone layer, where aluminum oxides can kick off the chemistry that breaks ozone apart. The full bill doesn't arrive until around the 2050s. Nobody fully knows what a permanent replacement cycle does up there. Here's what we do know. Nobody asked. Which brings us back to the covered gauge. The single most important number in this whole business, what one subscriber actually costs SpaceX, fully loaded, satellites and launches and dish subsidy included, has never been published. And here's why you can't have it. The S1 is the one document the law builds for disclosure, and even it only shows you the revenue side, that $81 a month. The cost side SpaceX treats as strictly proprietary, so every analyst pricing this company is guessing at the number that decides whether the whole bet worked. That's not an oversight. The machine keeps its own fuel gauge hidden. So next time you see that flat white dish on a roof, read it right. It's a fuel line, running from a bank account on Earth to a launch pad pointed at Mars.